Could you disappear from our sight? When I went to the wedding of my brother, a doctor, and the daughter of a business president, the bride told me that. The term middle school graduate was printed in large characters on my place card. It appears that the bride who was going to join our family did not only find me undesirable, but neither did my brother or my doctor father. Should we take that company down here? Someone whispered to me as I was ready to depart in despair. I gave those remarks a strong nod and decided what I wanted to do. My name is Kent Morgan, and I'm 40 years old. I'm single. I have a younger brother, 2 years my junior. His name is Kyle. Unlike me, who was just a middle school graduate, Kyle excelled in both academics and sports. He was truly the ideal of both brains and brawn, and our parents had high hopes for his future. Our family has a long tradition of producing doctors, and Kyle was on his way to joining that legacy. Our father is a doctor, and our mother is a nurse. But I was sickly from a young age, and because I was preparing for surgery right after middle school, I couldn't enroll in high school. My mother sympathized with me and always stayed by my side, but my father and Kyle were harsh, accusing me of being too dependent on her. They often made unreasonable claims like blaming my poor health on my weak spirit. I can't count how many times I wished I'd been born healthy, but if I ever voiced those thoughts, I knew my mother would blame herself, so I kept them bottled up. Still, I wasn't the type to let my sickness define me. After finishing the surgery and calming down, I thought, I will do what I truly want to do. Someday I want to live freely without relying on my family. If becoming a doctor was the only way to gain my family's approval, then I'd leave them behind as soon as I could. That's the resolution I made in my heart. After graduating middle school, I successfully underwent surgery, and 6 months later, I began putting my plans into action. I started with a part-time job at a restaurant. I was worried if they would hire someone like me with only a middle school education, but they welcomed me warmly, saying they didn't care about academic background at all. Apparently, my cheerful smile left a good impression, and that's what led to my hiring. Shane later told me I hadn't even realized it, but hearing that filled me with joy. From then on, I threw myself into learning the job, mastering the art of customer service. Before I knew it, I had turned 20. By that time, I had saved up enough to start living on my own, which drastically reduced my time spent with my family. When I first started working, my father and Kyle had mocked me, saying that someone with only a middle school education wouldn't last in anything. But when I told them I was moving out, they let me go without a word. I had expected them to say something like, "You'll never last living on your own," so their silence surprised me. Now I live independently and comfortably away from my family. I occasionally stay in touch with my mother or meet her, and through her, I hear about my father and Kyle's lives. Apparently, Kyle graduated medical school and became a doctor. He's now working alongside my father, helping run his hospital. It's impressive how he manages to thrive under the watchful eye of someone as strict as our father. That thought often crosses my mind. Looking back, the gap between Kyle and me had always been clear. This realization hit me once again, but I couldn't let it get to me. I resolved to focus on the work I'd been given and give it my all. With that renewed determination, I poured myself into my job. Before I knew it, I had turned 39. Though many things had happened during that time, I spent every day meaningfully. Then, at the end of the year, I received some surprising news while visiting my parents' home as I did every new year. Kyle had received a marriage proposal. The bride-to-be was the daughter of a company president, a woman named Anne. I didn't hear this directly from Kyle, but rather from my mother, with whom I kept in touch. At that point, they were only engaged, but they planned to register their marriage and hold the wedding after my 40th birthday. I naturally assumed I wouldn't be invited to the wedding, but during that year's New Year visit to my family home, something unexpected happened. "You heard about my wedding from Mom, right? I'd like you to come to the ceremony if you can. You're welcome to bring a friend along too," Kyle said as he handed me a wedding invitation. It had been so long since Kyle had spoken to me directly that I was initially taken aback. But as I held the invitation, the reality slowly set in. I had been invited to Kyle's wedding as a member of the family. Overwhelmed with joy, I stared at the invitation for a while, which made Kyle chuckle. "See you at the wedding." "Oh, and I'll introduce you to my fiancé," he said before leaving in a hurry, likely off to work. I was deeply surprised by how much he seemed to have changed, and I began to think he was making an effort to bridge the gap between us. I decided to let go of the past as well. For now, I just wanted to celebrate the happiness of the couple. I stared at the invitation, feeling as if it were my own joy to cherish. Time flew by, and soon it was the day of the wedding. Before the ceremony, Kyle introduced me to Anne. She was friendly, polite, and even treated me with respect. I couldn't help but think that meeting her had been the reason for Kyle's change. My father's attitude toward me remained the same, but the fact that my relationship with Kyle had improved was enough for me. My mother seemed happy to see us getting along, and she smiled more often than before. Knowing how much she had endured taking care of me in the past, her smiles filled me with gratitude. After checking in at the reception, my mother and I entered the hall. It was packed with Kyle and Anne's coworkers and friends. Their connections were impressively wide. Though I was overwhelmed by the sheer number of people, I was proud of Kyle for how far he had come. Today, I genuinely wanted to celebrate Kyle and Anne's happiness, but then I saw the name card at my assigned seat and my body froze. What? What is this? My mother, standing beside me, covered her mouth with her hand, her face pale. Some nearby guests even snickered when they saw it. On my name card, instead of my name, the words middle school graduate were written. Who on earth would do something like this? It was us, you middle school graduate. A familiar voice came from behind me, making me freeze on the spot. I didn't even need to turn around to know who it was, but the overwhelming sense of despair was crushing. Kyle, why would you do this to Kent? My mother turned around before I could, confronting Kyle with trembling words. I forced myself to turn as well, needing to see it for myself. There stood Kyle, laughing mockingly, alongside the bride. I didn't want to believe it, but the look on Kyle's face confirmed it. It was the same look he used to give me as a child whenever he looked down on me. Why isn't it obvious, Mom? Because he's just a middle school graduate. I never imagined there'd be a middle school graduate in the family I was about to marry into, Kyle said, laughing at me together with Anne. It's hard to believe what I'm witnessing, but there's no mistaking it. It's real. I swallowed the anger rising within me and questioned them. It's true I'm a middle school graduate, but so what? Is it really that shameful to be one? Is it such an unforgivable thing? Of course it is. You're already a stain on our elite family, and now you're affecting my wife's family too. Even so, Anne pushed through her family's objections to be with me. You should be grateful for her generosity, Kyle responded. Apparently, Anne's family, being the wealthy family I'm a company president, also dislikes me. When they learned Anne's future brother-in-law was a middle school graduate, they initially told her to break off the engagement with Kyle. However, the bond between Anne and Kyle was strong, and it didn't cause their relationship to fall apart. Eventually, her family had no choice but to accept their union, which brings us to today. We almost lost the chance to marry because of you. So Anne and I came up with this plan to teach you a lesson. We pretended to be friendly and supportive to set you up, just so we could humiliate you at our wedding. Kyle's words sent a ripple of shock through the venue. From the way he tells the story, I sound like the villain. It's as if I was the one who tried to break them up. By the way, it was Anne who came up with the idea to destroy you. She's my wonderful wife who truly understands me. We don't need a middle school graduate like you in our elite family. So Kent, I'd like to ask you to disappear from our lives for good. Could you kindly leave and never show your face again? Anne's smile is dazzling, almost like a sound effect could accompany it, but her words cut deeply. I'm left speechless. But it's true that I nearly ruined their marriage. Maybe. For their happiness, I should bow out gracefully. Fine. I won't stay. I'll leave the family as you wish. I promise. Really? Oh, I'm so happy. Thank you so much for respecting our wishes, Kent. We'll make sure to be very happy together. Won't we, Kyle? Anne says, overjoyed. Kyle nods in agreement, the two of them leaving me behind and heading toward the stage for their wedding ceremony. I can only watch their retreating figures in stunned silence. The people around Kyle, including his coworkers and friends, quickly walked to their seats. No one said a word to me. Even my mother, she's frozen, unable to say a word. She must be at a loss for how to comfort me in this situation. I can't blame her. Overwhelmed by despair, I slump into a nearby chair. I never suspected that the two people who had opened up to me so much would harbor such intense hatred toward me. But if I stayed here any longer, Kyle might eventually come over, angry, and tell me to get out of their sight already. Just as I decided I had to leave before that happened and was about to go, it happened. Shall we destroy that company? I heard someone approach me from behind and call out to me. Startled by the voice, I froze. Kyle had said that I could bring a friend of mine to the ceremony, but I didn't have any friends because of my frail health in school, so I asked my secretary, Jessica, to accompany me. The shock of being betrayed by Kyle and Anne had made me forget for a moment, but I nodded firmly at her words. I had once wished so strongly for their happiness, but now I'm overwhelmed with a desire to prove them wrong. Who is this? My mother, sitting next to me, looks between Jessica and me with confusion and hesitates to ask. Now that I think about it, I'd never introduced Jessica to my mother. Mom, this is your first time meeting her, right? This is Jessica, my secretary. She came with me today as my assistant. Secretary, but I thought you worked at a restaurant. Sorry, Mom. I should have told you sooner. I quit the restaurant job and started my own company. I'm the president now. When I reveal my role as a company president, my mother is so shocked she covers her mouth with her hand. I thought it wasn't necessary to talk about myself, but I might have been wrong. If I had told Kyle and Anne earlier that I'd started my own company and become a president, maybe none of this would have happened. With that thought, I stood up from my seat. I couldn't just sit idly by. Sharpening my gaze, I looked toward Kyle and Anne, who were radiating happiness as though they hadn't just spat cruel insults at me moments ago. Leaving the seat labeled middle school graduate, I made my way toward the two of them. Hey, what's your deal? Didn't we just tell you to get out of our sight? Why are you crawling back here? Kyle's face contorted with irritation as he saw me approaching the stage where the bride and groom stood. He suddenly burst into laughter as she looked at me. Oh my, Ken, are you so uneducated that you can't even understand words? At this point, I almost feel sorry for you. Am's words made Kyle laugh along with her as they mocked me yet again. But I remained calm. Looking at the two of them, the ones to be pitted were Kyle and Anne. They didn't realize they were about to face their own downfall. I just have one last thing to say. I realize I haven't introduced the person who came here with me today. I thought you'd like to meet them. Ha, like I care about whoever came with you. What, another middle school graduate like you? Ignoring your sneers, I introduced Jessica. This is Jessica, my secretary. Since I don't have any friends, I asked her to accompany me today. Your secretary? Don't make me laugh. You probably hired her from some agency. An agency? No, I am Mr. Morgan's personal secretary, and I assist him in his role as president. What? When Kyle mocked me, Jessica immediately and firmly denied it. Both Kyle and Anna were now visibly shocked to hear Jessica refer to me as president. Ha, my brother a president? Jessica, was it? You don't have to go out of your way to humor him by calling him that. Actually, now's a good time to clear things up. I really am a president. I pulled a business card case from my suit pocket, took out a card, and handed it to them. They snatched it from me and quickly scanned its contents. Sure enough, the card bore my name, the company's name, and my title as president. This is just a piece of paper. Paper? You must have had it faked. Want to confirm it? I pointed to the phone number listed on the card. Clearly flustered, Kyle clicked his tongue in irritation but reluctantly pulled out his phone from his tuxedo pocket and called the number. After a while, a staff member answered. When he gave them my name to confirm, they indeed said I was the president. After ending the call, he began trembling uncontrollably. Steve, it's true, isn't it? No way. It could just be someone with the same name. That's not true, Kyle. To everyone's surprise, it was Anne who was the first to deny Kyle's words. She had been silent and motionless ever since she checked my business card, and for good reason. She was the daughter of a company president. Seeing the name of my company, she probably couldn't hide her shock. Her face had turned pale. W, what do you mean, Anne? Why are you acting like this? That's because the company on this card, it's one of my father's business partners. Anne's words sent shockwaves through not only Kyle, but the entire venue. A business partner? So what? There's no way his company is bigger than your father's, right? No, it's actually the other way around. If my father lost the contract with this company, it could lead to bankruptcy. That's impossible. Reality hit Kyle like a truck, leaving him utterly speechless. Anne seemed to have already admitted defeat, her head hanging low in despair. It looked like I had successfully proven that I was truly a company president. Kyle glared at me, his fists clenched in frustration, our eyes meeting in a clash of triumph and bitterness. But I decided it wasn't worth engaging with him further. Instead, I shifted my gaze to Anne, who had clearly given up. And it seems your father, Mr. Mason, isn't here yet due to his business trip. I imagine he'll arrive soon to see you in your wedding dress. However, since I'm leaving now, I'd like to leave him a message. A message? Anne's voice trembled, her nervousness almost laughable. Looking at her now, I could see just how foolish she truly was. Please let him know that I intend to terminate our business contract. He can ask you for the details. If you do that, my father's company will go bankrupt. That's cruel. I'm perfectly fine with that. After all, we're no longer family. We're complete strangers. Besides, wasn't it you who told me to disappear from your life? Rest assured, I'm quite good at following through on my promises. I smiled at her. With that, Anne's face turned even paler as she collapsed to her knees. Ignoring her, I turned my back to Kyle and Anne and signaled to Jessica. Jessica, I'm assigning you a task. Immediately terminate the contract with the bride's family's company. Understood, Mr. Morgan. With a polite bow, Jessica followed me. As I descended from the stage on our way out, I noticed Kyle's friends and colleagues staring at me in disbelief, but I didn't care. Mom, I'll be in touch. I'm heading out now. After returning to my seat, I turned to my mother, who still looked utterly shocked as if she couldn't believe what had happened. I said my final words to her and headed toward the exit of the venue with Jessica. Just then, as if to block our path, someone appeared in front of us. What do you think you're doing, Dad? Can't you become a president and you pull this kind of stunt? You're nothing but a curse to this family. The person who stood in our way was none other than my father. He too seemed shocked by the fact that I was the president. Perhaps due to his extreme agitation, his words were harsher than usual. He pointed toward the stage. Warren was crying uncontrollably, and Kyle was trying to console her. At a glance, it might seem like I had ruined the wedding, but the truth was they had brought this upon themselves. So now you're talking to me, huh? After all this time of ignoring me, you show up just to say that. Maybe I really am a curse to you. Reflecting on the time when I was physically weak compared to now, I said those words. But at this moment, I realized once again that something I didn't have back then is now my greatest support. And that's fine. I don't expect anything from this family anymore. There's no need for us to reconcile. I found something far more important than family. I glanced at Jessica, and when she noticed, a soft smile formed on her lips. I had my company, my employees, and a reliable secretary in Jessica. With them by my side, I had nothing to fear. What happened to Kyle and Anne is their own doing. They're wolves in sheep's clothing. An elite family? How long are you going to cling to that illusion? A person's worth isn't defined by their education or their past. Whether your actions were right or wrong will be revealed in time. You insolent. Ignoring my father's outburst, Jessica and I walked past him and finally left the venue. After walking some distance and leaving the venue's property, I suddenly stopped and sank to the ground. Are you all right, Mr. Morgan? Jessica crouched beside me, her voice filled with concern. Since I had told her about my health issues and family history, she likely assumed that the confrontation with my family had taken a toll on me. Sorry, I'm fine. The tension just hit me all at once. Even someone as composed as you gets nervous, Mr. Morgan. That's surprising. She seemed genuinely taken aback, but I quickly corrected her. I'm human too. Of course I get nervous. Even though he's my father, it took a lot of courage to face him and speak for the first time in a long while. My hands are still trembling, but I feel relieved. I said everything I wanted to say. Jessica, thank you for accompanying me today. I feel like I've finally let go of everything tied to my family. I'm glad I could be of help. Standing up, I expressed my gratitude to Jessica, who smiled warmly at me in return. Later, my mother contacted me and shared what had happened at the venue after I left. Apparently, the wedding had turned into something resembling a funeral. Some guests were puzzled as to why the family didn't know that the middle school graduate older brother was actually a company president. Others found the whole situation ridiculous and left early. Anne reportedly cried nonstop playing the victim. But when her father, Mr. Mason, arrived and she explained what had happened, he was absolutely furious. He stormed out of the wedding and began bombarding my phone with calls. Of course, I didn't answer a single one. As for the contract termination, Jessica handled it all perfectly. She truly is an exceptional secretary. The day after the wedding, poetic justice came swiftly for both Kyle and Anne. Kyle's behavior toward me at the wedding became the talk of his hospital. He was criticized as heartless and cruel, and his reputation within the medical community plummeted. No one wanted to associate with him, even my father, as the hospital director, faced backlash for failing to guide his son properly. The hospital's reputation crumbled. It was no surprise that doctors are supposed to stand by their patients, and yet my father and Kyle, despite knowing I was once physically weak, continued to harass me, using my middle school education as an excuse. This behavior ended up drawing the resentment of other doctors and nurses who attended the wedding. As for Anne, after joining Kyle and mocking me, one of her father's business partners, and losing the contract, she was fired from her job. She had been working in her father's company in preparation to take over someday, but that door was firmly shut. Mr. Mason disowned her, severing ties completely. After terminating the contract with my company, Mr. Mason tried to get back on track. However, his efforts were in vain and the company went bankrupt. With no place to go, Anne turned to Kyle, suggesting they move in together as husband and wife. But Kyle wasn't having it. This all started because you came up with a plan to humiliate my brother. If not for that, everything would have been fine. He not only rejected his new wife, but also placed all the blame on her. Enraged, Anne fought back. Tracing the problem to its roots, she argued that it was Kyle who had revealed that his brother was a middle school graduate in the first place. Their arguments escalated, and on the very first day of their marriage, it had a massive fight. Soon after, they decided to get a divorce. The hospital's reputation continued to deteriorate, and with patients and staff abandoning it, it eventually closed down. My father and Kyle, who had run the hospital together, found themselves blacklisted in the medical field, unable to secure employment. They ended up taking on part-time jobs to make ends meet. It seems that Anne also ended up switching to night work. However, life has been tough for her, as she was a company president's daughter until recently, and she's struggling to hold down a job. I heard all about what happened to Kyle and the others from my mother. After the wedding, my mother divorced my father. We were no longer bound by the toxicity of my father and Kyle, and had begun living a freer, happier life. Wanting to repay my mother for all her sacrifices, I gifted her a luxurious apartment. Though she said it was too much for her, I insisted. After all, she had raised me with love and care, even when I was weak and sickly. This was the least I could do. I'm glad you were able to make your mother happy, Mr. Morgan. This was uttered with a soft grin by Jessica, who had heard my narrative about my family. It's all thanks to my dependable secretary. On the surface, though she never displays it, she is a very exceptional individual, in my opinion. I promise to follow Jessica's example and keep working to improve as a person and a professional, even if I am far from flawless as the president of the firm.